Today we will be discussing the Pauline authorship of the prison epistles. There are 13 books of the New Testament that are widely held to have been written by Paul. Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, and Philemon. For 7 of these, Pauline authorship is undisputed, while for the other 6 there has been significant further discussion as who the true author is. 4 of these epistles fall into the category of prison epistles. Those 4 are Colossians, Ephesians, Philippians, and Philemon. These are generally held to have been written by Paul during one or more of his imprisonments. Even among these 4 books, 2 of them, Colossians and Ephesians, have had their Pauline authorship disputed. It is these 4 and their potential authorship that we will be discussing today. In his video series on the prison epistles, Dr. Dan Darko spends a good deal of time in at least 3 different lectures discussing the questions of Pauline authorship of these books. Dr. Darko's background with a PhD in New Testament and early Christianity, along with more recent scholarship in New Testament studies, focused on the letters of Paul, seems to make him an expert on this topic. Arguments for Pauline authorship include the fact that all of the 13 letters generally attributed to Paul have many things in common. For instance, all of the letters begin with him identifying himself as the author. He includes prayers for the readers, answers questions brought from the church or individual, addresses issues in the church that he has been made aware of, gives instruction on things to believe, gives instruction on things to do, and gives closing greetings. In general, disputes of Pauline authorship are based on differences between the books, including language, thought, and style. Those who dispute Paul's authorship of these books generally believe they may have been written by one of Paul's disciples, though some believe that some of the books may have been written later, even after Paul's death, and just claim to have been written by Paul to increase its visibility and credibility. Specifically with Ephesians, disputes focus on vocabulary because the words used in the book vary significantly from that of other books where Pauline authorship is not disputed. However, the audience for Ephesians, Christians in Ephesus, who were a mix of Jews and Gentiles and likely included those who had come from one of the many other religions prominent in the large city, would necessitate using vocabulary that was specific to their situation. Many of Paul's books were written to Jewish Christians who would have specific information and knowledge of specific words that the Christians in Ephesus may not have had. Another dispute about Ephesians and Colossians is that the theology is different from that in other letters. Those who use this argument will focus on the issues and words that Paul did not use in these books, rather than on the large number of similarities between these books and other undisputed books like Romans, Galatians, and the letters to the Corinthians. However, like Paul's use of language, the specific theological topics that he chose for these books can be better ascribed to the fact that these books were written at a different time in Paul's life, that he was writing from a different location, and since he was in prison, he may have believed that they could have been withheld from distribution if his captors read them, and he is writing to a different group of people with different situations and needs than those in other churches. In general, after reading the prison epistles and other Pauline letters and listening to the arguments on both sides as presented by Dr. Darko, I find myself agreeing with his assessment that Paul did in fact write each of these letters. The similarities in content is such that I would ascribe that they were written by the same person. When taken in historical and cultural context, the differences are easily explained in both theology and language patterns. For instance, when comparing Philemon, for which Pauline authorship is not disputed, and Colossians, we see that significant agreement in that they are both written from prison. Timothy and Paul are mentioned as writers in both letters. A similar group of people are mentioned in both letters. And Onesimus, the slave that Philemon is largely about, is mentioned as one of the couriers of the letters to the Colossians. I do allow room for the thought that one or more of these letters could have been spoken by Paul to an associate who then transcribed it for the readers. However, that does not take Pauline authorship of the topics and wording out of the question. There is also room in this belief that one of Paul's disciples or fellow prisoners could have written small parts of the letters that Paul then approved to be included. To conclude, I believe that Paul's authorship of these 4 prison epistles, and in fact all 13 of the letters generally ascribed to him, are sufficiently secure, and I will hold to that belief unless or until further proof exists to the contrary.